Bonjour. Hope you're all good. Today we're going to be looking at London Necropolis railway service. This was a service that conveyed dead bodies out of London and various other cities around the world. And what I'm noticing is, what we're going to look into is the given reasons and the time periods and what events were going on at them times. Let's get stuck into it. London Necropolis railway station was the Waterloo, London terminus of the London Necropolis Railway. The London Necropolis Railway was opened in 1854 as a reaction to severe overcrowding in London's existing graveyards and cemeteries. It aimed to use the recent developed technology of the railway to move as many burials as possible to the newly built Brookwood Cemetery in Brookwood, Surrey. There was two locations for the station. The first was in operation from 1854 to 1902 and the second from 1902 to 1941. Although it had its own branch line into the Brookwood Cemetery, most of the route of the London Necropolis Railway ran on existing London and South Western Railway. Consequently, the site was selected in Waterloo near the LSWR recently opened London terminus at Waterloo Bridge Station, which is now London Waterloo. The building was specifically designed for the use of mourners. It had many private waiting rooms which could also be used to hold funeral services, and a hydraulic lift to raise coffins to the platforms. Existing railway arches were used to store the bodies. In 1899, the repositioning of the station was proposed. The new building was designed to contrast with other funeral directors' premises by being as attractive as possible. In 1902, the railway was moved into the new building and the earlier station demolished. In the first half of the century, the population of London more than doubled from little under 1 million in 1801 to almost 2.5 million in 1851. The city's dead had been buried in and around local churches. Old and fresh graves were regularly exhumed to free up space for new burials. The contents unearthed and scattered, decaying corpses contaminated the water supply. The capital city suffered regular epidemics of cholera, smallpox, measles and typhoid. 1848 to 1849, cholera killed 14,601 people, and by the end of that pandemic it had killed 60,000 people. It sounds to me like a pandemic, and it sounds to me like this was a way to usher out the dead bodies, because it's funny how it's after a or should I say at the start of the World's Fairs. Maybe this was a tool by the controllers to get rid of people who don't consent with the new world, because obviously this was a new revelation here. It's the same sort of thing that's going on now. You've got a scientist going around doing a report and then giving it back to the government, and then the government act on it. So check this out. There was a guy called G.A. Walker. He wrote about the horrendous burial conditions. It was a report on the overflowing cemeteries, with tales of grave desecration, body snatching for the sale of medical cadavers, ill effect on the health of those who lived nearby. He also documented that the smell of miasma from the shallow buried bodies was poisoning the living. Grave digging and undertakers were also documented to have contracted typhoid fever and smallpox from handling deceased corpses. Hands, face, space. Keep your distance. That's ringing in my head at the moment. The government could no longer ignore the health risks posed by the overcrowded burial grounds. A series of laws known as the Burial Acts were passed in the 1850s. They consisted of banning the burial of people within central London. In the first year of 1852, the effort of the total 213 cemeteries closed. So they closed the cemeteries. The act was to close the cemeteries. And anyone dead from that day on would be shipped out of town, unless you was rich or of someone of notability. And it smells like just one of the tools used in this reset and repopulation subject that we're covering, because you have world fairs which are re-educating people. Also, at the same time, you've had mass amounts of people brought to them areas, and also at the same time you're having mass amounts of people being ushered out, dead bodies taken out, and you've got babies being shipped all around the world, orphan babies. It's incredible, mate. Orphan trains and necropolis trains for the dead. At the time the service was inaugurated, the London necropolis trains were divided by both classes and religion, with separate Anglican and non-compliant sections of the trains. This distinction applied to both living and dead people, intended to prevent people from different social backgrounds from mixing. The carriages were intended for all classes of religion and were very similar in design. The primary difference was a different ornamentation on the compartment doors. So this sounds to me like it's how they filter who they're keeping and who they're getting rid of. You know? So and then the reason I think it's the Necropolis train, just to make you familiar, or people around the time, it was dead bodies going around on the trains, just to make it norm. You know? That was their predictive programming. But I reckon this was just a way to shift out people that didn't comply. During the Second World War, Waterloo Station and nearby Thames bridges were a significant target for Axis bombing. There was several near misses on the Necropolis station during the London Blitz in 1941. Preceding this led to the closure, even though it wasn't destroyed then. And ironically, it still managed to be operating during World War II, or the main part of it, like during the Blitz. You know, it's quite ironic that. But anyway, it was predicted that the train service would convey 5 million dead bodies in the first century of operation. In reality, at the time of the last train, in April 1941, almost 87 years after opening, only 203,041 dead bodies had been grateful of the service. Brookwood Cemetery and London Necropolis are both the same name used for the same site. Mourners who entered the station entered through iron gates originally designed for the Great Exhibition of 1851. Now it's a bit of a far out scenario, you know, trains for dead people, but it gets even more far out when I looked and scratched the surface a bit deeper and found out it went on in multiple cities. It was going on in New York, Germany, Australia. I'll just name some few places. So Rockwood Cemetery, they had a railway line, and that was in Australia. Faulkner Crematorium and Memorial Park and Springvale Cemetery railway line in Melbourne. Those all operated from 1867 to 1948, and that's ironic because it's just after the war, just after World War II. So, and in Wales there was a railway station that operated as a funeral service in 1885 to 1928. New Southgate, which is another one in London, New Southgate Cemetery had a dedicated railway 1861 to 1866, and that train station was demolished in 1904. So this was a thriving business, Obviously it was just, I believe, exterminating bodies, getting rid of people that weren't complying, and at the same time doing funeral services. Maybe as a cover up, maybe I'm wrong. It's just ironic that these things are going on in places that are being repopulated. And I know obviously there's a influx of people, but as we know, these controllers couldn't make a mistake like that. They knew these places would swell in population, and they obviously would have known and accommodated for the death and the burials of these people. So that's why I believe this was just a tool to get rid of certain categories of people, like in World War II. Maybe this is something linked up, same sort of operation with the Jewish people in the trains, getting told they're going somewhere else. Don't know, I'm just guessing, I'm just scratching surfaces and just guessing. But Finland, in Helsinki in Finland, a 2 kilometre along the side of a track of Malmi railway station, and it took dead bodies to a cemetery, and that decommissioned in 1954. And in Germany, I don't know if I'm saying this name right, but Friedhofsbahn. It opened in 1913 and closed in 1952, and it ran from Berlin Wannsee station to Standorf forest station, so it went to a forest. See what I mean? Some things are a bit strange. And that was 20 kilometres away. It's just strange that they're taking these people right out of the way. And another thing that I've noticed, in England, the cemetery was called Brookwood Cemetery, and in Australia it's called Rookwood Cemetery. So they've just took away the B. Is that a coincidence or what? And also the train station in Australia used to be called Regent Street train station. Coincidental or what? And the buildings used are very strange, especially the ones in Australia. It's literally like a church cross train station, which obviously is where it's meant to be. But it's just very, very weird. A very weird concept. But now I've had a look, I can see crystal clear that this was some sort of tool, because it was happening in multiple places, and some of the places had the same names, you know, so it looks like it was a command from a higher source, you know. So people who ain't complying right now, who ain't wearing masks, myself included, if you start seeing Necropolis trains pop up, don't get on them. Anyway, I've probably bored you to death, so you might have to get one of these trains soon home. But I just want to share this topic with you. The controllers, it's quite interesting, you've got a triangle with an eye in the middle there. But I thought I'd share this topic with you. It's funny that they forecast to get rid of 5 million people by these means in 100 years. So it sounds like a bit of a depopulation as well. A bit like the times we're going on now. Anyway, I hope you like it. Thanks for your time. One love, be lucky. Please like and subscribe. Ta-da.